Good morning. This Wednesday, we begin a 4-week series, Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, with the Reverend Dr. Paul Wallace, astrophysicist, professor of astronomy and physics at Agnes Scott College, and a pastor at Decatur Baptist Church in Atlanta. He was supposed to be with us, of course, in May here in Basking Ridge, but of course that couldn't happen, and so he will be joining us virtually, but we're going to get him for 4 nights instead of just a weekend, so that will be lovely. He's going to be talking throughout these 4 weeks about the relationship between science and faith, a subject he's written 2 books now on. And he's going to be focusing on his first book called Stars Beneath Us. And in that book, he begins the conversation of faith and science not from its usual place. Usually, conversations of faith and science begin in Genesis. He starts in Job. Remember the story of Job. Job had everything. He was the wealthiest man in the land. He was blameless and upright. He was fine and upstanding, and everyone knew this about him. And then, of course, in one day, he lost all of his property, all of his wealth, all of his sons, all of his daughters, and then he lost his health. And then sitting down in the ashes of what used to be his former life, he uttered those most wonderful words, "The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." This incredible words of faith in the midst of so much heartbreak. But then, after those words of faith, he's joined by his 3 friends who first sit Shiva with him. They sit in silence, being there to comfort him. And but then they can't keep from speaking. And for about 35 chapters, they want to give him some tough love and tell him that things like this don't happen to somebody. Someone doesn't lose their entire life in a day or 2 without it really being their fault. That he really must have angered God for this to have happened to him. He must have done something he shouldn't have done. He must have failed to do something that he didn't do. And after 35 chapters, I don't know, perhaps you and I would do what Job did, and we would fold, which is what Job does. And he begins to see the situation through their eyes, that God did this to him. But he doesn't accept the premise that he did something wrong, because he knew he didn't. He knew he didn't. And so he blames God. He begins railing at God, like shaking his fist at the sky, saying, "I didn't deserve this. This isn't just." Towards the end of this diatribe, he asks for a judge to come and, between him and God, hear the case and argue in favor of Job, that God treated him unjustly. In his grief, and after being barraged by 35 chapters of his 3 friends pounding him, he wanted to just hold on to something. And what he held on to was his sense of justice in the world, his sense of what was right and what was wrong. And in a sense, he wanted to see the world through his own eyes and his own experience, as most of us do. And if the book ended there, I don't know, maybe we'd side with Job at the end and say, well, I guess he was right. But the story doesn't end there, because then God shows up and speaks to Job in the whirlwind. Can you imagine the whirlwind of God showing up and God speaking? And this is what God begins to say to him. God doesn't answer his call of justice or fairness. He doesn't talk about why bad things happen to good people. He doesn't even address the sorrow and grief God says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Have you commanded the morning since your days began and caused the dawn to know its place? Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And where is the place of darkness? Have you entered the storehouses of snow, or have you seen the storehouses of hail?" God shows him like this cosmic view of the universe from its foundation and the elemental forces. Paul Wallace responds to this first section by saying Job is here being confronted with his essential ignorance. And I do mean essential. This is not ignorance that can be filled by mere information. It is not ignorance in the sense of, I don't know the composition of Saturn's rings, or I don't know who the ancestors of Homo sapiens were. To be confronted by your own ignorance can be intimidating, especially if you think you really know something. If I were Paul's editor, the only thing I would change in this paragraph is to be confronted by your own ignorance is intimidating. There's no can be about it. But God is not finished. He showed him this sort of cosmic view of the universe. And then he comes and starts talking about the flora and fauna of the earth. God says, "Can you hunt the prey for the lion or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God? Do you give the horse its might? Do you clothe its neck with a mane? Do you make it leap like a locust? Its majestic snorting is terrible." That's got to be one of the best lines of the entire Bible. Its majestic snorting is terrible. And of course, the answer to every single one of these questions is no. Wallace replies, "These are intimate moments in wild lives. The Lord notices and is present to them all. Job is not." The clear subtext is that he has never once even considered the lives of these marginal creatures so precious in God's sight. Job sees the world like in tunnel vision. He only sees it through his eyes. He doesn't have the wider angle of God. But God is still not finished. He showed him sort of the cosmic picture of the universe. He showed him the flora and fauna of the earth. And then he goes to the mysterious deep, to creatures never seen by human eyes. This section is a little long, but I just think it's so wonderful I have to read it. God says, "Look at Behemoth, which I made just as I made you. It eats grass like an ox. Its strength is in its loins, and its power in the muscles of its belly. It makes its tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are knit together. Its bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs like bars of iron. It is the first of the great acts of God. Only its maker can approach it with a sword." And after Behemoth, he then goes to Leviathan. Can you draw Leviathan with a fishhook? Or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose? Or pierce its jaw with a hook? Who can strip off its outer garment? Who can penetrate its double coat of mail? Who can open the doors of its face? There is terror all around its teeth. Its back is made of shields in rows, shut up closely with a seal. One is so close to another that no air can come between them. These are the words that God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind. Wallace responds, "At these words, Job's cosmos is turned upside down. The inversion long threatened is complete. Once a righteous king, Job is now ruled by an amoral monster. Once powerful and in control, he is now overwhelmed by chaos. Once central, he is now peripheral. Once rich, he is now beset by a creature who laughs at his wealth. He who once helped the weak and marginalized has become the weak and marginalized. Job has discovered his essential poverty. Job's lesson here, according to Dr. Wallace, is that he once thought that he was the center of the universe, both as a human being and as a fine, upstanding citizen that everyone looked to with respect. And God showed him that he isn't. And neither is his understanding and view of the world. This point is exactly Paul's point in the lesson from Philippians this morning. Paul begins that section with his pedigree, the list of accomplishments, the degrees and diplomas that hang on his wall. Paul says he was circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew born of Hebrews. As to the law, a Pharisee. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As to righteousness under the law, blameless. He is a member of God's chosen people, and not only a member of God's chosen people, but a teacher and a leader of God's chosen people. If he was looking for something to hold on to, that would be it. He had it. Paul had everything he needed to be sure in himself and sure in his place in the world on good days and bad days. But then Paul says, for his sake I have suffered the loss of all things. He's talking about the things he just mentioned. The loss of all those degrees and diplomas on his wall, all the things that buffered his pedigree. And I regard them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him. And then at the end of that second paragraph, he gives what I think is the central point of, if not the entire New Testament, then at least the entire book of Philippians. Paul says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection. If we stopped there, we might go, okay. You know, we all want power. Power feels like control, like we can hold on. There are lots of people in this world who seek after power. We watch them do it, sometimes aghast. But that's not the end of Paul's sentence. I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the sharing of his sufferings by becoming like him in his death. Paul could have held on, like Job, to his own understanding of the world and to his own standing in society and all of that. But Paul let go of all of that to hold on to the cross, to hold on to Christ. Job's job after the whirlwind was to find the center. Paul's job after having it all was to find the center. And both of them, their job was to realize they aren't it. But God is. Christ is. And you don't get power without first going through suffering and the cross. It's quite a time that we're living through right now. I mean, if you took a picture of us today in church and showed it to us last year, we'd be like, what? What happened? Like, what? What? Why so few? Why is everyone wearing masks? Why is everyone so far apart? What's going on? When we get a whole year's worth of breaking news in the matter of a day or two, I mean, the world just feels like it is churning. And we, like so many in the world, if not everyone in the world, is looking for something to hold on to, something to moor ourselves to, something to help us make sense of the world. And the temptation is to do exactly what Job did and to hold on to our own understanding, to hold on to the world just through our own eyes, to just tunnel vision, to just hold on to ourselves and our own ideas of who we can trust and who we can't. We can do that. Or we, as people of faith, can hold on to the true center, to God, to Christ, and his sufferings, and his cross, and see the world and the various chaoses that meet us each day, not through our lens, but that lens. Amen.